arrive. First, though, this evening, our top stories. Theresa May has dismissed speculation that she could be ousted as Prime Minister over her Brexit agreement. While the Brexit Secretary Dominic Raab is one of 2 cabinet ministers who resigned from the government, 5 more Conservatives also quit their ministerial roles. Leading Eurosceptic MP Jacob Rees-Mogg has submitted a letter of no confidence in Mrs May after claiming she had crossed her own red lines on Brexit. Well, hello there. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, then, we'll see what's making the headlines with the political journalist Isabel Oakeshott and the Observer's chief leader writer Sonia Sodha. Welcome to you. Busy day, no doubt, at Westminster. Let's see how the front pages have reflected on the day's events. As Theresa May vows to stay put in number 10, the Financial Times describes her as defiant, but says the Conservative Party could soon be in a state of civil war. The Telegraph quotes the Prime Minister's promise, "Am I going to see this through? Yes, I am." The Express has Mrs May being similarly stoic, while the Times describes Mrs May as lonely and staggering onwards. The Eye has the headline, "Plotters move in on the PM." The Metro sums up the Tory infighting with the headline, "Blue on Blue." The Daily Mail, unusually, has stern words for Brexiteer MPs, asking, have they lost the plot? The Guardian describes today as a day of hostility, while the Mirror says the government is in a state of crisis. Elsewhere, the Daily Star reporting that presenter Holly Willoughby is nervous about the creepy crawlies on I'm a Celebrity. Be safer to be down under right now, I think, probably, if you're Theresa May. Isabel and Sonia are here. What a fascinating day it has been, right from the early morning resignations right through Theresa May's late news conference in Downing Street. What's your sentiment at the end of the day?
Well, in just the beginning of what's likely to be several more fascinating days or even weeks, we still don't know tonight whether she can cling on. I mean, she has, as many of the headlines in tomorrow's papers reflect, been very defiant, struck an extremely determined note saying she's not going to move unless she is forced out. But all the signs are that the backbenchers are preparing for some type of attempt to force a no-confidence vote. And it's absolutely up in the air as to whether she will survive that. And in fact, the reason that that vote hasn't happened sooner is probably less to do with the number of letters that are formally required to trigger that process and more to do with the calculations that are being made as we speak and have been being made over the last few weeks, really, amongst those who would like to see the back of her as to whether they can actually win a confidence vote in the Commons.
And that's the point. If they lose it, she gets a year's grace. There's all sorts of ramifications for them.
And that's the worst case scenario. So it's a really difficult judgment call for some.
So we've always said that the chairman of the 1922 committee is the only person who knows how many letters have gone in. But presumably those members of the European Research Group, Jacob Rees-Mogg et al., they all talk amongst themselves and they all communicate and find out who's put their letter in to try and presumably coordinate this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was quite a significant moment today when Jacob Rees-Mogg stood outside Parliament and said very publicly for the first time, I'm putting my letter in, I'm challenging Theresa May. But I agree with Isabel that I think there is a lot of behind-the-scenes calculations going on in place here because they absolutely, the Brexiteer rebels do not want to trigger a confidence vote that Theresa May wins because what the Brexiteers ideally want is they want to knock Theresa May off the top spot after next March, after we've already left the European Union.
So to the newspapers then, the Daily Telegraph, am I going to see this through? Yes, I am. Nobody knew what she was going to say shortly after 5 o'clock today, whether she was going to trigger a leadership debate already herself. But there she was, stoically standing there, as resolute perhaps as she was in the House of Commons, which was a marathon performance for her, answering all those individual questions by MPs.
And that's what she does. Yeah. She is a survivor. I mean, think back only a little more than a year ago when people were writing her off after her disastrous party conference, people were writing her off after she lost her majority. This woman is extraordinarily resilient and keeps on defying her critics. So absolutely no one should write her off at this point.
And I think actually, I mean, I'm somebody who's been very critical of Theresa May because I think she's never really fronted up to the country the truth, which is that Brexit will result in some very, very difficult trade-offs. But you've got to have just a teeny bit of admiration for this woman.
Only a teeny bit? I think
just
more
a
than
teeny
that.
bit, just a teeny bit, because she is clearly staying there, I think, out of a sense of public duty. And I think it contrasts very strongly with the actions of men like Boris Johnson, David Davis, Dominic Raab. These are leavers who played a very prominent role in the referendum campaign, who basically lied to the country, and then realised when they couldn't deliver what they promised, have absolutely abdicated all responsibility and walked away from it.
Obviously, I've got to cut in there. I mean, the idea that those leavers lied to the country, I think, is completely unfair. It's not true.
350 million
I think
a week
well,
for the NHS?
let's not rehearse that, because people are very bored of hearing about that. I mean, I would characterise it very differently. I would say that those who have resigned today are people of principle, and they feel that the deal that Theresa May proposes is an absolute betrayal of what people voted for, and they cannot in all conscience continue to be part of a government.
I'm going to jump ahead to the Daily Mail, if you don't mind, which is strangely critical against the Brexiteers. Obviously, you have to point out the editor has changed, and that is why. Have they lost the plot? As preening Tory saboteurs undermine the Prime Minister, their party, Brexit and Britain's future, the Mail asks simply, have they lost the plot? What does the Daily Mail want in this article, and how bigly does it contrast with what we used to hear?
This is extraordinary. You know, as somebody who worked for the Mail during the referendum campaign, when the Mail was full throttle behind the kind of Brexit that I think people like Jacob Rees-Mogg and Dominic Raab are now arguing for, to hear that language being used, to see that language in the front page of the Mail, characterising those who would see a different deal as saboteurs, precisely the language that the Mail, under its previous editor, Paul Dacre, was using for Remainers. So it's a real turnaround for the paper.
I think it's extraordinary, and I think there'll be a lot of people thinking about the extent, because the Mail was considered to be a very influential paper in the last referendum campaign, and I think there will be a lot of people thinking about, well, the Mail has really significantly changed tack here. If there were another referendum on May's deal, and I think we very much could end up there, I think it's looking more likely than ever, actually. I don't think May can get her deal through Parliament. I think when that happens, we're going to have complete and utter gridlock, and I think in many ways going to the country and putting her deal to the country will be the only way of resolving that. And actually, if you've got papers like the Mail who've changed stance, that could open up some quite interesting room there for Remainers.
Another influential paper, The Sun, we've just had their front page in. You may have seen what it said yesterday. We'll take a look at that. She's on a sticky wicket. Obviously, she was asked that question about liking batting and saying that really she supported Jeff Boycott, and he was always still in position and still fighting on.
We're not going to get into the cricket analogies, are we?
Yes,
We'll just
very little
expose our
cricket
own
knowledge
ignorance there, I think.
But the point is, she absolutely is. She knows she is. She's come out fighting. And in the Commons today, she constantly had to remind MPs who are asking her questions, you're asking me about the withdrawal agreement and the transition deal. It will not be the same when it comes to the future relationship, which can't be decided until we leave the European Union. Do you think she should push that more? Do you think she should say we are leaving the customs union after all of this? Do you think they believe that?
I think people are going to be very sceptical on that, on both sides, actually. And I think if you look at the withdrawal agreement, I think what people see is a real sort of possibility that we will be trapped either in a transition arrangement or in the backstop forever. And I think in many ways that's a much better situation than leaving Brexit without any deal at all. But I think what worries the Brexiteers and her party is that they see that as the end game here. And I think the reason why we've got to this backstop with a UK-wide customs union is you cannot have a clean break from the EU and respect the Good Friday Agreement. And actually, saying this is a backstop, dressing it up as a backstop and kicking the can down the road for another 5 years isn't going to change that hard reality.
There's more than this. Some people are saying you can't have the pure Brexit that the Brexiteers want and protect jobs in this country. Do you agree with that?
Well, what I think is the case is that the detail of May's deal does precisely what Sonia says is the fear, which is it threatens to lock us into a sort of in perpetuity transition in which absolutely nothing changes. At the top of Downing Street's briefing as to the key selling points of this deal last night, they were putting end of free movement of people. Well, that won't happen anytime soon. We don't have any idea when that would actually happen.
Who was it that said that the referendum would solve the euro question for once and for all? Was it David Cameron? I'm not sure. But anyway, was it Cameron?
Anyway, he's probably sort of pondering that in his shed.
I hope he's not reading the Metro. Blue on blue, their headline. May fights on despite cabinet resignations. Will it hurt that she's lost yet another Brexit secretary, do you think?
I think it will hurt her.
Who wants to do the job?
I mean, no one's.
It
looks like nobody's
question mark around Michael Gove, of course.
And why would you take that job at the moment? We've seen the last two people who've held that job, indeed the only two people who've held that job, have felt the need to walk out. Why is that? It's because they are disempowered. They may be called the Brexit secretary, but actually these negotiations are being handled by officials and being run from number 10.
Yeah, I take a very different view. I think they're walking out because when they're faced with the hard reality of negotiating with the European Union, they realise that what they wanted to achieve is actually impossible, and they're abdicating responsibility and walking away. But I do think that although this will hurt Theresa May, I suspect she will cling on. I don't think the Brexiteers have got the numbers to topple her right now. So I would be very surprised if we see her go in the next few weeks.
Well, so let's take a look at the Times, shall we? Lonely May staggers on. There we are, their headline. She did have some support in the House of Commons. Nicky Morgan pointing out the irony that those very MPs who had criticised a meaningful vote in the House of Commons are now planning to use it to derail her plans. Support too from people like Amber Rudd. Alan Duncan coming out also saying that Conservatives are pragmatists and not ideologues, pointing out effectively that the Brexiteers are fantasy chasing.
I am wincing here at you suggesting that this may be of any comfort to Theresa May. All the characters that you've just named have made life very difficult for her, particularly Anna Soubry, Nicky Morgan. They've been very, very strident Remainers. One other thing I'd like to point to in the Daily Telegraph tonight, they've got a fascinating little line which they've put in the 6th paragraph suggesting that the DUP will withdraw their support for Theresa May withdraw their support for the government unless Theresa May is replaced. Now, that seems to me a very big deal indeed. I'm not quite sure why it's so far down in the story. Suggests that possibly there's a bit of uncertainty about that.
OK, we'll see if we can chase that. I don't think that's the paper you're talking about, is it? It's the Telegraph. We will chase that. Certainly interesting. Will they lose their £1 billion? Anyway, we'll take a look closer in that detail. Plenty more still to come, even more on Brexit, including business leaders' positive response to the draft agreement.